want to hear from Mel.
Yeah.
You've read a little bit now in the Analects. It's the last couple of weeks. I'm not expecting necessarily like, it's what do you like about this book kind of thing. And I just want to hear if there's anything that stood out to you, maybe even in relation to things we covered last week, because there were definitely some similarities, or just if you've had any further thoughts. I would expect at least that some of you have questions.
This is very sentimental for me in a way, because this is where I remember starting, and actually I think we've started a few times. It's not just one time where we started in the beginning here, but it kind of brought back a lot of foundational things, because when I first started coming into these books, it was a pretty big changing point for my life, and it kind of resurfaced a lot of wisdom that I may have let kind of lie dormant within me, and kind of a new desire to really want to put this kind of life wisdom in the practice. And I can be more specific with that just when we get into each number, but I really enjoyed reading it again.
I have a question.
Good.
I was just wondering what the four great human relationships are. I know that he stated them, but I was just wondering what were your thoughts on them?
That is actually something, I guess the theme of which we will start to look in a little bit together today. So it'll be kind of the next section of this introduction where we read just the importance that Confucius placed in family relationships. There's a phrase or a term that some of us have become familiar with that is used in this discussion to kind of give this conversation or this topic a name, and that's filial piety. Those are two kind of odd words, a little bit foreign to our usual vocabulary, but it just has to do with the faithfulness and the dutifulness that one exercises in family relationships. And that was, and actually in many ways still is, a very integral part of Chinese culture, and not necessarily in such a way that I think we should all learn to emulate in a shallow sense, but at least come to understand what the heart behind it was, what the cultural importance behind it is. It's like the vessel or the system in which honor is exercised in relationships. So we're going to be given more context for that. It's a good question. It's a very relevant one too, because you guys will be looking into it. Anyone else? I'm earnest to hear more, or I'm eager to hear more about it.
I was kind of curious about his parents, Confucius's parents. I don't know if it goes over it in what we're going to be reading. I don't know if I missed it or something, but didn't know if you knew anything about them or his relationship with them.
So, not a whole lot is known even about Confucius, even less about his parents. My mom asked me a similar question the other morning. There are legends about his family. One in particular that's always stuck with me, just because it's a little dramatic. It was either Confucius's father or grandfather. I don't remember his name, but there was one instance in which their dwelling was it was crumbling, I think due to some fire or something. So everything was about to collapse, and pretty sure it was Confucius' father. He held the door frame to the entire house while all of his family escaped. So that might have been Confucius as a child, I don't know. And I don't know if his father ended up being killed by the collapse of the building or not, but he basically saved his family by holding the door frame of the house. That's like pretty much all I know about his parents. I don't even know if it's true, but
We'll say as well something that I noticed in regards to how Confucius refers to himself. I think the idea of a native substance, that like intricate quality, has a lot to do with the culture you are brought up in, and that goes with both societally, but mostly familial. And I think of someone like or what's his best student called again? What's his name? Yang Hui. I had it backwards. Him. Of being someone with a lot of native substance and almost having those things known to his heart without ever learning them. You compare that to someone like Confucius himself, who he himself says he actually doesn't have a lot of that native substance, and he has to learn a lot of these things to put them into practice. And I think that might be why he doesn't mention his parents all that much, because I think while he practices what he preaches, so he probably does hold a great deal of respect for them, I doubt that they raised him in such a way to where a lot of these things that became important to him later in his life were foundations of his childhood. I think that's why he describes himself as not necessarily having a whole lot of native substance in that way. So that would just be my assumption, is that they weren't necessarily like huge imparters of this way of life to him.
Yeah, he doesn't mention much. Anyone else? Where is everybody at this point?
About halfway.
And were we supposed to read all of them?
We had 2 weeks, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was just this one.
So good.
I was trying to make it nice and slow.
All right. So, we're going to continue in the introduction a little bit. It's going to begin with a description of someone that lived long before Confucius. I won't read the entire description of this character's name, or he was known as the Duke of Zhao, which Zhao being the dynasty that they were living in, and the culture of that dynasty, especially its roots and beginnings, is much of what influenced Confucius' thought. So the early kings of that dynasty, again, this is hundreds of years before Confucius' time, were very exemplary models of the same kind of virtuous character that Confucius was learning himself and then wanting to teach. He was actually wanting to see that same kind of character, that same sort of ruling order, kingdom culture, if you will. He was wanting to see that same way being put into practice again by the rulers of his time, because at that point it had completely vanished. As we mentioned before, it was a time where different lesser rulers of all these different fractured states were constantly battling against one another. There was no one true king or ruler. So this Duke of Zhao in particular, one of the easiest things to remember about him, as just kind of an example of the sort of character he had, when the first kings of the Zhao dynasty came into power, there was a time when the son of one of those kings was basically, he became king long before he was old enough or ready to be king. So that could have been because his father died early, but he was just a young lad. And so this Duke of Zhao was a regent in his place. He basically took the role of the king without being the king, to wait until the young boy was old enough. And of course, when you're given that kind of power, it is really, really easy, especially since the transition of a dynasty just took place, really easy to take all the power for yourself, right? But that wasn't the case for the Duke of Zhao. He had every opportunity to establish his own line, to be the one that would proceed and retain rulership of China at that time. But he faithfully fulfilled his role and position, and when the child was old enough, or when he became a man, he gave back his power. So that example of his uprightness and his mind to the will of heaven at that time was, again, a very exemplary model for Confucius, very influential. But what was particularly what was a real and lasting benefit to Chinese culture from someone like the Duke of Zhao during his time of his regency. He instilled a way in which inheritance would work in ancient China. So he basically established a system. It sounds like really boring and consequential stuff, but for a kingdom, for a culture and a people, this stuff is a lot more important than you realize. And so this will just give a brief description of that, and then we'll go into how this impacted Confucius. Confucius had a profound admiration for the Duke of Zhao, who as a regent in the early part of the reign of his young nephew, King Cheng, was the architect of the Zhao feudal system some 500 years before Confucius' time. It is beyond the scope of this introduction to discuss in detail the influence of the Duke on Chinese society and the Chinese political system. It is sufficient simply to single out for mention his most important contribution, the clan inheritance system known as Zhongfang. Under this system, succession passes to the eldest son by the principal wife. Again, the details of this is not something you have to understand. I'm just giving you the gist of it. Younger sons or sons by concubines become founders of their own noble houses. Thus, the feudal lord stands to the king in a double relationship. In terms of political relationship, he is a vassal, while in terms of blood ties, he is the head of a cadet branch of the royal clan. Again, this is a bunch of complicated stuff that I don't even fully understand. But the system that he put in place for China is something that, or for the dynasty of that time, is something that actually prolonged the existence of that dynasty for hundreds of years. So it was a very wise set of policies put in place. Following the footsteps of the Duke of Zhao, Confucius made the natural love and obligations obtaining between members of the family the basis of general morality. The two most important relationships within the family are those between father and son, and between elder and younger brother. The love one owes to one's parents is xiao, while the respect due to one's elder brother is tu, or tu, I don't really know. The romanization is odd. But they give these relationships names, okay? If a man is a good son and a good younger brother at home, he can be counted on to behave correctly in society. Tzu Yu said, "It is rare for a man whose character is such that he is a good son and obedient as a young man to have the inclination to transgress against his superiors. It is unheard of for one who has no such inclination to be inclined to start a rebellion."
I think the second one is demon.
Yeah, I wonder just with the two. So when we go forward in this, you're going to hear a lot of, actually really everything is about a male individual, right? If we take into account the construct of this system of relationships that is being put forth by Confucius here, and see it in light of the way that God's family culture works, then are we thinking in terms of male and female when we think of God's family culture? No, we're thinking in terms of sons, right? So don't get caught up on the younger, older brother, the father-son thing, simply as it has to do with earthly relationships. This is definitely describing, and should still be understood to be describing, earthly relationships. But it is definitely not limited to that. Even when you're thinking of, again, being a son or brother, those things don't hesitate to think in terms of a daughter or sister either. It applies to both. He goes on to draw the logical conclusion that being good as a son and obedient as a young man is perhaps the root of a man's character. In later Confucianism, an undue emphasis was put on being a good son. But we can see here that even in early Confucian teachings, Xiao was one of the most basic virtues, that being the name for the father-son relationship. If being a good son makes a good subject, being a good father will also make a good ruler. Love for people outside one's family is looked upon as an extension of the love for members of one's own family. One consequence of this view is that the love, and so the obligation to love, decreases by degrees as it extends outwards. Geographically, one loves members of one's own family more than one's neighbors more than one's fellow villagers, and so on. Socially, one loves members of one's own social class more than those of another class. Thus, it would not be surprising if benevolence was confined to one's fellow men. But what is much more important to remember is that this does not mean that one does not love the common people at all. One loves them, but to a lesser degree, and perhaps in a different manner. In Confucius' terminology, one should be generous to the common people. This is a kind of an interesting conversation, right? That you have like these, not a way we tend to ever describe or talk about something like love or affection as being like something expressed in degrees depending on your place in another person or another social circle's life. But the reality of it is undeniable. And again, this is another very helpful thing to think of in terms of God's family too. Those who we show the greatest love to, as far as our spiritual fellowship and intimacy, are those among God's own family, are they not? So that kind of order of relation. I mean, we actually had that same kind of thing illustrated for us in my dad's class some months ago, didn't we? That kind of again, it's an order of relationships is a very real thing. It's a very important thing to consider, especially in light of the way that love extends from those closest to you, the manner in which you love those closest to you, to those who are not as close to you. To describe it as an extension is a very interesting thing. So it is loving those, say, that are your neighbors or of the same social class as you or whatever, not as this exclusive thing from the love you exercise towards those who are members of your own family, but rather as an extension of that love. So it is based in that love. It is informed by the love that you have for your family members. Even if it might be at a lesser degree, it is all still of the same heart. It's springing from the same source, from the same culture of love that you've with the relationships you have that are closest to you. So to piece it up is not at all what is being suggested here. It's actually a very natural order and flow of love in relationships. So, returning to the discussion on goodness, and I don't know if you were following me along last time, but it says benevolence, but that is not a very helpful translation, so we're saying goodness when it says benevolence. Concerning the nature of goodness, there is another answer given by Confucius, which is of great importance, because the question was put to him by his most talented disciple. James just mentioned it. Yan Hui was asked about goodness. The master said, "To return to the observance of the rites through overcoming the self constitutes goodness. If for a single day a man could return to the observance of the rites through overcoming himself, then the whole empire would consider goodness to be his. However, the practice of goodness depends on oneself alone and not on others. There are 2 points in this definition of goodness which deserve attention. First, goodness consists in overcoming the self. Second, to be good, one has to return to the observance of the rites. It's another phrase that might be very unfamiliar to us. Take the first point first, being overcoming the self. It is a central tenet in the teachings of Confucius that being moral has nothing to do with self-interest. To be more precise, to say that 2 things have nothing to do with each other is to say that there is no relationship whatsoever between them, either positive or negative. If being moral has nothing to do with pursuing one's own interest, neither has it anything to do with deliberately going against it. Why then, it may be asked, is it so important to emphasize this lack of relationship between the 2? The answer is this. Of all the things that are likely to distort a man's moral judgment and deflect him from his moral purpose, self-interest is the strongest, the most persistent, and the most insidious. Confucius was well aware of this. That is why he said, more than once, that at the sight of profit one should think of what is right. In another context, he warned men in their old age against acquisitiveness, basically the desire to have. He also asked, is it really possible to work side by side with a mean fellow in the service of a lord? Before he gets what he wants, he worries lest he should not get it. After he has got it, he worries lest he should lose it. And when that happens, he will not stop at anything. Confucius came to the conclusion that he would not remain in undeserved wealth or position in spite of there being desirable objects. The point about returning to the observance of the rites is equally important. The rites, which the Chinese word for that is li, L-I, were a body of rules governing action in every aspect of life, and they were the repository of past insights into morality. So the rites were actually written things about how to conduct yourself as a gentleman in certain scenarios. So it was very explicitly detailed code of conduct in ancient China. It is therefore important that one should, unless there are strong reasons to the contrary, observe them. Though there is no guarantee that observance of the rites necessarily leads, in every case, to behavior that is right, the chances are it will, in fact, do so. To this point we shall return. For the moment, it is enough to say that Confucius had a great respect for the body of rules which went under the name of li. That is why, when Yan Hui pressed for more specific details, he was told not to look or listen, speak or move, unless it was in accordance with the rites. So it seems pretty strict, doesn't it? This, in Confucius's view, was no easy task. So much so that if for a single day, a man could return to the observance of the rites through overcoming himself, then the whole empire would consider goodness to be his. It was as strict and seemingly black and white as it seemed to be. Confucius placed a very heavy importance on the rites. There are 2 occasions when answers are given which emphasize another aspect of goodness. When Fan Chu asked about goodness, the master said, "The good man reaps the benefit only after having overcome difficulties." Similarly, when Sima Yu asked about goodness, the master said, "The mark of the good man is that he is loath to speak. And then went on to explain, when to act is difficult, is it any wonder that one is loath to speak?
What's that word? Low?
So he disdains, in a sense, speaking. He's very slow to speak, you could say. That he considered goodness difficult can be seen from his reluctance to grant that anyone was good. He would not commit himself when asked whether Zulu or Jianchu or all these different disciples or people were good. Nor would he grant that either Lingyan Suwen or Chen Wen Su was good. So sorry, my pronunciation is not great, but these are different people that seemed very exemplary in the way that they carried themselves. And people would come to Confucius, don't you consider this person good? Like, look at what they do, look at what they did, look at their way. And Confucius every single time would say, I don't think I could call them good. It's just like, that's a really powerful, meaningful term to use. Even someone like that as outstanding and shining as their example might be, I hesitate to use that word. He even refused to claim goodness for himself. This is no more than one would expect from a man of modesty. However, he did say of Yan Hui, in his heart for 3 months at a time, Hui does not lapse from from goodness, while the others attain goodness merely by fits and starts. This emphasis on the difficulty of practicing goodness is echoed, as we have seen, by Sun Tzu, who described goodness as a heavy burden. But although Confucius emphasized the difficulty of practicing goodness, he also made it abundantly clear that whether we succeed or not depends solely on ourselves. As we have already seen, he said in answer to Yan Hui's question that the practice of benevolence depends on oneself alone and not on others. It was quite clear that failure to practice goodness was not due to lack of strength to carry it through. He said, is there a man who for the space of a single day is able to devote all his strength to goodness? I have not come across such a man whose strength proves insufficient for the task. Thus, when Jianchu excused himself by saying, it is not that I am not pleased with your way, but rather that my strength gives out, Confucius's reply was, a man whose strength gives out collapses along the course. In your case, you set the limits beforehand. Confucius stated his conviction unambiguously when he said, is benevolence really far away? No sooner do I desire it than it is here. So as great and lofty as I think it seems to be, it's always right in front of you. He comments next here on a line from the Odes, which was a collection of ancient poetry, ancient even in Confucius' time. It was a very interesting book. They used it in a very interesting way, because as it was all poetry, they would still use it as like a way to express a deeper feeling or thought they had about something in a way that they couldn't otherwise do if it was just explicitly described by them. So, giving you an example here, Confucius mentions this line from the Ode. The flowers of the cherry tree, how they wave about. It's not that I do not think of you, but your home is so far away. Confucius comments on that, saying, he did not really think of her. If he did, there is no such thing as being far away. He must have made this comment with its possible application to goodness in mind. So we had a bit more about goodness explained and described to us here. A lot more, actually. So I know this is a lot being given to you at once, but are there any further thoughts you have about the aspects such as how it has nothing to do, as he was describing it first, with self-interest, or some of the other points, such as it having nothing to do with one's strength or ability, but more so one's willingness.
Would goodness just be a form of selflessness then?
It is very much so, yeah. Definitely not something that can be known or practiced in self-interest, as they were saying, because like you said, it has absolutely nothing to do with it.
Is there more to it than that though? Like is selflessness only a part of like goodness?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Remember, we were saying, just to do a bit of a recap from last week, some of the things that Elijah wrote on the board, that was speaking of Ren, goodness being, relationship, it being, in many ways, a fuller expression of the verb to love. So it's a multifaceted term for sure, which is why there's so much description given about it. But I want to hear some more of your thoughts. Okay, not just about what was read just now, but also tying in back to last week, in your readings this week.
I like how they mention how overcoming the self is kind of just leaving it be rather than like exalting it or like tearing it down. And I think that is something that is often not clear to us when we are attempting selflessness, I guess, which is, I mean, it's almost never successful when we are understanding it in the wrong way, and we often kind of think less of it than it's meant to be. Like, we're not supposed to, like, tear ourselves down. We're just kind of setting ourselves aside, I guess.
Yes.
It's like a neutral way of thinking of self.
Mm-hmm. That is what I really appreciated about the description he gave. You're saying, to be more precise, to say that two things have nothing to do with each other is to say that there is no relationship whatsoever between them, either positive or negative. And if you think about people that are, especially those that first come to realize the nature of self, of natural mindedness, of self-centeredness, and just how repellent that is, what then tends to be on those people's mind so much following that? It's self. They think, man, I'm such a selfish person. I'm always thinking in these selfish ways. And so self becomes a focus to them in a way that it never was before. And that's not to say that they're automatically in a bad place. I think that is actually part of this. It's a stage of that journey of dying to self, is you kind of have to get through all that realization of, man, I'm a really self-centered person. And it's really hard from that point on not to think about how self-centered you are in everything you do. But you don't stay there. You don't stay in that dwelling upon your self-centeredness. Otherwise, you just have reached a different pit than your ignorant natural mindedness that you had before. And so the good man, or the one who walks in goodness or knows goodness, is not. It has to do with neither pit. Being caught up in yourself so much that you don't even realize how much you are. Also, not being obsessed with how selfish a person you are, or always having that on your mind. It's kind of like for those of us who were attending this morning's discussion, that's like shame ruling your mind rather than it being a tool to know and walk in what is right. What about the aspect of goodness which has to do with, Benji, you had asked about What is meant by loathe? An aspect of goodness that has to do with being loath to speak. Does that remind anyone of a scripture?
I think it's Proverbs, right?
What do you think?
Is it the one that says to be slow to speak and quick to listen and slow to anger? I
Yes, it's
switched up
James. That's James, though. Yeah, you got the
James,
You got the verse.
right.
Yep.
It also reminded me of in one of the Let Go letters, where Fenelon talks about how we should learn to speak less and act more.
There you go. Yeah. That's another thing we brought up in our time this morning, and that is something that we will look at more, is the emphasis placed here on whether or not your actions align with your words. As to what that really means, I think, I was just telling the others, we don't have a full understanding, but that is something that will play a very integral part of the student's heart. One who desires to walk in goodness and walk in the way. It has more to do, that's what I'm trying to say, it has more to do than simply with sincerity and even trustworthiness. It definitely includes that. Those are definitely the fruits of one whose actions and words are in a state of alignment and harmony, but anyone else? Does anyone have a question about because this will be mentioned very often in the Analects, the rites or li, that system of conduct. The ancient Chinese actually had what more or less served as their kind of they had a book, basically, had a document of rites, I think. It was a very comprehensive rule book, basically, for how to properly go about basically every existing relationship. Again, it always had to do with, as meticulous as it seemed to be, it always had to do with relationships between individuals, whether it had to do with, like, as we mentioned, those foundational ones with father and son, elder and younger brother, or even husband and wife, or ruler and subject, all of those things. Like even where you were to stand in the event that a ruler would make his way through some passage, or the pace and the speed at which you were to walk if you were passing by an elder. Those are all things that were just so detailed in the rites. But what do you think is the significance or purpose of that?
Like,
a lot of what is being discussed here with goodness.
the format of it being kind of like a rule book reminds me of like the law in the Old Testament.
Yes, that's a very good comparison.
And I feel like the first way that I tend to think about them is kind of like training wheels for us to like they're not, we shouldn't be focusing on the rules, but like the heart behind them. So like often it's not like the actual action that matters, but it's like what you're trying to get to behind it.
Yes.
Yeah, there definitely seems to be a way that he describes in many of his Analects where it's very backwards to what we would think in our modern culture of having to to know something before we can practice it.
Mhm.
And like what Haley's saying with even the rites, it's instilling like a heart so that you can start to practice.
Absolutely.
And then maybe you'll have the words after it's put into practice, in your life. But yeah, it definitely does seem like a vehicle to, if you're walking past an elder slowly, what is that telling you? Like, it's showing a respect and it's showing a position with that relationship, like it's like all sorts of stuff.
And that's what it's supposed to. That's what it's meant to, right?
Yes. I don't remember the words we even used when we went over this in a writing class last year. Do you guys remember the class we were talking about? We were kind of jumping out of the rule aspect of writing. We were going through elements of style together. And we were describing rules as what were the words that we used? I don't remember. One was indicative
The guideline.
versus rules as
It's like a fence.
yeah, the metaphor we used was like the difference between us seeing rules as like a fence that keeps the sheep or the flock, whatever it is, in a specific place, versus rules as being like the rod of the shepherd to lead the sheep in a certain direction. It's meant to take you somewhere. It's not meant to keep you static in a specific place. So the indicative,
Limiting versus indicative.
yes, there you go.
Static versus dynamic.
Yeah. And again, that's not focusing on the aspect of rules being something that you can eventually learn to break. That's like completely defeating the purpose. It's not it's not trying to reach a place where you like overcome the rules as if they were like some cocoon or whatever to bring about some transformation or anything like that. They're meant to point to something. They're meant to lead you somewhere. They're meant to reveal and unveil something that you would not have been able to see otherwise.
There was a writing Nicole had sent out a little bit ago regarding, I can't remember who wrote it. It was one of the prominent authors, modern day authors that we read a lot about, maybe Britton or Warnock, I'm not sure, but it was about the horses and the breaking and...
Harness of the Lord.
Yes, but it was with that analogy of the horses and that vision that he had regarding that. But regardless, that had started out with a very intense fencing in of those young colts, and very limiting and very restrictive. But over time, once you are then pulling the master's carousel in a way, even the broader fences, like these young colts were brought into a very confined space compared to the other colts that were in this broader fence. And then once those young colts that would have been broken properly and started pulling the master's carousel, well then even those broad fences aren't even a concern to them, because it's not necessarily about where they ought or ought not to be when they are following the master. That actually very much ties into what I was about to say in regards to that 12.1 when Yan Hui was asking about goodness. A little further down, the master says, do not look unless it's in accordance with ritual. Do not listen unless it's in accordance with ritual. Do not speak unless it's in accordance with ritual. Do not move unless it's in accordance with ritual. Very much reminds me of what Jesus had said in regards to, I only do what my Father would do. I only speak what my Father would speak. I think very much so that part of what Jesus is as the Word becoming flesh is in a way the greatest possible expression of those rules, of those fences, right? The entire point of those fences in the first place, if you think about it, right, is to keep the horses safe, right? It's to keep them from danger. It's to keep them in a proximity to the master. But then when you start to inquire as to what the purpose of the rules were, and you find the greatest expression of the rules themselves, that being the master. Well, when you are pulling the master's chariot, when you are under his bridle, when you are in the closest proximity you can be to him, well, then you think about what the actual purpose of those fences are, And then it's not about whether you are in or out of the fence. You go where the master goes, because he is the expression of those fences. He is the purpose of those fences. And so then, to your point, Haley, it's not about a direct following or staying in these fences or these rules, right? It is about the heart. And Jesus, the master, right, is the heart of the law. He is the heart of the rules. He is the words becoming flesh. And so by following him, by staying in proximity with him, with going along this path that he has set out, that is, in a way, the greatest expression of the fence, to where you get to this proximity and this correctness and this goodness that even if you stayed in the fences your entire life, you would not be able to get to such a place unless you were under him and taking that path with him.
Jesus did say, I have not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. Yeah, I've been thinking about that while you were talking.
That is exactly what it is, right? He has not come to, take down the fences, but he is the reason for the fences.
There are many thoughts I had when I was first considering this term, that very much, and I do believe later on in the development of Chinese philosophy and the way that something like Li is expounded on ties in very intriguingly with the idea of logos. And because not to go too deep into it, but something like Li, which came to mean more than just the system of rites written in an old textbook, but having more to do, it was described as like being to put it bluntly, like the governing principle of reality and the nature of things. So it was like this. Li is the word to describe the order of the universe, basically, and to see how this is expressed through the life, was and is expressed through the life of a person, namely God's Son, is I can only imagine just how the Chinese would have seen this ultimate expression and purpose of this principle that was so dear and important to them. Again, this is the point is not to speculate the ways in which different cultures would interact, but more so underneath all of it, regardless of which culture it was in, because again, you have even Greeks who had a similar description of a very similar term. The word logos is Greek. There's always this hope in the fulfillment of the order of things being perfected in a vessel, being perfected, being brought into its fullest, most accessible expression in what many knew would be actually a person. It's just a crazy, it's crazy to see that continuity, that thread through many different cultures, actually.
And then subsequently a people.
Exactly.
Right. I mean, the thing that stood out to me the most from the reading of chapter 1 was 1.4, the way in which he evaluates himself.
Yes.
And I love that 2, potentially even 3 of them are relational. Right. And so,
Yep.
all of this that we're talking about, the law and rites and rituals, right, it's intended to produce something in a people with their relationships. Right, and certainly in our context, it's to create a dwelling place, right, for God Himself, His very Spirit,
Exactly.
to create a body, and that is only done through right relationships.
Yep.
Even breaking down that word of goodness, with its root word being person and relationship, I just think that's really cool.
It's like an inexhaustible subject, honestly. Every time I return to it, it's just like, man, there's so many places you can go in this. Because you can see it in everything. Because it is everything.
See the way, brother?
Yeah.
It's so funny, those writings you had us do for that rule thing, I was revisiting that writing that you had me do. I say me, but all of us, but just my writing with that. It is crazy. I don't even think I knew what I was talking about at the time. I was kind of just writing what felt right, but like, it is exactly this subject, and I didn't even know it back then. It's just really cool to see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jaden, I felt similar with like the first couple points where the commentaries was like explaining how they're thinking of learning in the context of putting it into practice. And I'm like, that's already the way I was thinking about learning when I read the word learning. I was thinking about how you could practice it.
Mm-hmm.
So this is very interesting.
I think that is that native substance in ourselves really being brought up. I think native substance has a lot to do with culture. I Confucius, and this is I think the one thing I actually disagree with him on. He thinks it's, I'm not sure. The way it's expressed, at least, the way I interpret it, is that it's this inborn quality that you either have or you don't have, and it's basically like genetic, I guess. But I think it is very much culture, and the culture that you are raised in. And I think part of all of us being reborn, but even a lot of you younger ones still being very much in the developing stages of your mind. I think it is that native substance is being formed within all of us. And so I think these things that we might not even consciously recognize, I think it's so cool to read and then be like, oh yeah, I was already doing that. But like be given
I would offer
words
a slightly different perspective on that. I think we all have native substance. So it's not that it's a starting point, right? And we all have a starting point that is native and true to us, to your point, through culture, right? Through how we were raised, through the environment, through the time and history in which we were born. And so it's not like I was born with a better native substance than somebody else. It's just they're different, right? And I think the point in all of this is that native substance is the truth that is within us, right? And through the cultural refinement, it is brought forth into a bigger and broader and gooder state, right? But it's not like I have it and you don't, right? It's no, we all have a native substance. They just look different.
Yeah, that is the proper understanding of native substance. It's not an inherently good or bad thing. It is just literally the makeup of your person and as it was composed by your environment and things like that. And that's something that is then entered into the process of cultural refinement through the teaching of the way to an individual. Anyways, I have an assignment for you guys this week. It'll be due not this Sunday, but the next. And this ties in a little bit to that first thing we mentioned, part of Emma's question, and it will be something we look into more the following week. So that is, I want you to write, no word requirement here. What is your role in your household? You do have one that is distinct from everyone else in your family. We're all either a son or a daughter, a brother or a sister. But what is expected of you as such? Something or nothing? Are you fulfilling that role to the utmost extent? Or do we simply see ourselves as another member of the family and stop there? I'll read to you something you all should have read this week, actually, from your reading assignment in the Analects 1.4. A disciple said, "Every day I examine myself on 3 counts. In my dealings with others, have I in any way failed to be dutiful?" I want you to see the kind of heart he's having towards himself, his own character. In my interactions with others, have I in any way failed to be trustworthy? Finally, have I in any way failed to repeatedly put into practice what I teach? And I'm just going to make an assumption here. I won't be right about all of you, but I imagine you're probably thinking, if you're thinking seriously about it at all at this moment, I know it was just given to you, but you're probably thinking two different things. Or maybe both. First, I don't often think about this. Or maybe you're saying, I don't think I'm fulfilling that role, the role that I do have, to the fullest extent. And I wanted to tell you, if any of you are asking yourself these questions, that's a very good thing. You're beginning to adopt a concern that is a very good concern to have. It is a burden worth faithfully carrying, that concern. And obviously these things will come, your thoughts about them will come as you spend more time meditating on it. But I want you to also know something that is very important to keep in mind. If you find that this burden, that this concern is too weighty, that there is too much judgment involved about whether or not you are being considered to be fulfilling that role as well as you should be or not, that you are too weak or too flawed, too imperfect a person, all of that only means one thing. You don't want to carry it. It doesn't begin with how you feel about yourself or others, your worthiness, or your strength. It begins with your willingness. We just read this in our introduction, but let's turn to the Analects 6:12. Again, we just read this book. A disciple of Confucius said, "It's not that I do not delight in your way, Master. It is simply that my strength is insufficient." And he answered him, the Master said, "Someone whose strength is genuinely insufficient collapses somewhere along the way. As for you, you deliberately draw the line." So that is one thing you may see in yourself as you further consider this question, right about it, that being, what is my role in my family? The sort of thoughts you might start to see come up in you are those that would undermine, basically, or offer some kind of lesser explanation as to why you aren't fulfilling that role. And if that is the thing that is preeminent in your thoughts and your heart about it, then you're drawing the line. It doesn't matter your strength, your imperfections, all of those things. It matters, what are you going to do now? So that's the question. That's the assignment. That's it. Oh, actually, you guys are supposed to finish last week's writing this week. Sorry, last week's reading this week, this following week. But I'm going to add a few Analects to read following those. So yes, I am making you kind of crunch it up a little bit more. So finish your.
And this will also be
You're reading.
this week, whatever you're describing.
Yeah, what I'm about to give you will be due before this next Tuesday, okay? This reading. It's very, I'm just giving you a few more Analects to read in light of actually your writing assignment. That is 2.4, 2.6, 7, and 8. So just those additional 4. And of course finishing up what you were assigned last week, alright? That was it.